because the story you're about to hear isn't the fairy tale you were sold. This is the story of the erased years, the buried evidence, and the one man who almost exposed it all. It began not with a dramatic confrontation, not with a tearful goodbye, but with a moment of chilling, silent finality. A day that started like any other for Trevor Engleson until he checked his mailbox. Inside, nestled amongst the bills and advertisements, was a small, plain brown envelope. No return address. His name typed on the front. There was a weight to it, a heavy metallic clink that made his blood run cold. He opened it right there under the California sun. And the world tilted on its axis. Into his palm slid the wedding ring. The very ring he had placed on Meghan Markle's finger. A symbol of a vow, a future, a life built together. Now it was just a cold, inert piece of jewelry. There was no note. No, I'm sorry. No explanation. The silence of that gesture was louder than any scream, more brutal than any argument. It was a message coded in platinum and memory. You are deleted. This chapter is over. I have already moved on. For Trevor, a man who valued loyalty above all this, wasn't just a breakup. It was an annihilation. It was the first terrifying clue that the woman he married was capable of surgically removing parts of her past she no longer found useful. But what he didn't know then, as he stood frozen on his doorstep, was that this returned ring was just the first thread. And when he pulled it, the entire meticulously woven tapestry of Meghan Markle's story would begin to unravel, revealing a hidden portrait so shocking it would threaten everything the world thought it knew about the Duchess of Sussex. Before the titles, before the royal wave, before the world knew her name, she was just Meghan. And in those early days in Hollywood, Trevor saw not a duchess but a driven, ambitious actress. But what set her apart wasn't her talent alone. It was her terrifying sense of purpose. To outsiders, they were a golden Hollywood couple, the successful producer and the rising star. But behind closed doors, Trevor began to see the cracks in the gilded frame. Her life wasn't lived. It was staged. Every dinner party was a networking opportunity. Every friendship was scrutinized for its strategic value. A photographer friend of theirs later recalled, she'd analyze photos of herself with a military precision. This angle is better. This smile looks more genuine. It was never about capturing a moment. It was about crafting an image. Trevor admired her drive initially. He called it her spark. But that spark was morphing into a controlled burn, and he was starting to feel the heat. Friends began to notice the subtle shift. The way her laughter sometimes sounded a bit too practiced. The way her gaze would drift during personal conversations as if she was already scripting her response. A former assistant director on the set of Deal or No Deal, where she was a briefcase girl, remembered, she was always pleasant but distant. Like she was an anthropologist studying us, learning what to do and what not to do. She wasn't one of the girls. She was already on her way somewhere else. The turning point was a quiet, creeping thing. Long nights where she was suddenly stuck at a script reading on a different coast. Weekend plans canceled last minute for a charity event no one had heard of. When he'd ask about her day, the answers became vague, polished monologues that felt like press releases. The woman he shared a home with was becoming a stranger, a beautiful ghost haunting the life they'd built. The distance between them wasn't just emotional, it was metaphysical. She was phasing out of his reality and into the one she was building for herself. And then the ring arrived. The final curtain call on their marriage. But for Trevor, the heartbreak was quickly overshadowed by a gnawing, unsettling question. If she could erase him so completely, so coldly, what else had she erased? In the stunned silence after the divorce, Trevor did what any rational person would do. He tried to make sense of the senseless. He wasn't looking for revenge. He was looking for closure. He started retracing their time together, looking at old photos, rereading emails, trying to find the moment it all went wrong. But as he pieced together the timeline of their marriage, he stumbled upon a void. A black hole in the narrative of her life. It was a period of roughly 12 to 14 months, a few years before they met. In every official biography, every interview, this period was glossed over with generic airbrushed phrases. A year of personal growth, a time of travel and reflection, focusing on humanitarian work. But when he tried to pin it down, the details evaporated. There were no photos from this time on her social media, which was strange because she documented everything else. There were no public records of the travel she claimed. It was a ghost year. He reached out to a few mutual friends from that era. One, a former roommate, recalled, "Yeah, she just vanished for a while. She said she was going to South America to do some charity work with children. But when she came back, she was different. More focused, more intense. Another friend, a makeup artist, remembered a different story entirely. She told me she was taking intensive acting classes in New York. She said she needed to disappear to find herself. The stories didn't match. The timelines were contradictory. Driven by a growing unease, Trevor started digging deeper. He accessed an old shared cloud storage drive, one she must have forgotten about in her digital purge. And there, in a folder marked Old Pics, he found the first crack in the facade. It was a series of candid shots, not from South America or New York, but from a quiet, unassuming neighborhood on the outskirts of Chicago. The photos showed Meghan looking younger, less polished, but with a soft, genuine smile he rarely saw in Hollywood. She was wearing simple jeans and a t-shirt, pushing a shopping cart, laughing with an older couple in their backyard. But one photo made his breath catch in his throat. In it, Meghan was sitting on a porch swing, and she was holding a little girl on her lap. The girl was about 2 or 3 years old, with a head of dark curly hair and bright, intelligent eyes. And the resemblance to Meghan was staggering. It was in the shape of the eyes, the curve of the smile, the way her head was tilted. It was an uncanny mirror image, scribbled in the digital file name. Who was this child? And why was Meghan Markle in her missing year living a seemingly domestic life, with a family no one knew, and a little girl who looked like her shadow? The discovery of Noel shifted everything for Trevor. This was no longer about a broken heart. It was about a hidden life. The missing year wasn't a blank space. It was a locked room, and he had just found the key. He became obsessed. He cross-referenced the dates on the photos using the metadata and confirmed it. This was the missing period. She wasn't in a New York acting class or a South American village. She was in a suburb of Chicago, deeply embedded in the life of this mysterious family. Using his skills as a producer, he began a quiet investigation. He tracked down the location from the background of the photos, a specific street in a specific neighborhood. He made discreet calls, posing as an old friend trying to reconnect. The pieces started to fall into place, and the picture they formed was baffling. The family, he learned, were the Giordano's. They were private, salt-of-the-earth people not connected to the entertainment industry in any way. The husband, Michael, worked in construction. The wife, Lena, was a part-time receptionist. They had one biological son who was away at college. And then there was Noel. Neighbors, when cautiously approached, remembered Meghan vividly. She was around a lot, one elderly woman recalled. She'd stay for weeks at a time. Helped with the groceries, played with the little girl in the yard. We just assumed she was a cousin or maybe a nanny, but she was so close with them. It felt maternal. Another neighbor offered a more pointed observation. That little girl, Noel. She looked so much like that actress, it was spooky. We used to joke about it, but the family never talked about it. If you asked, they'd just change the subject. Trevor managed to find an old deactivated Facebook profile for Lena Giordano. It was a treasure trove of hidden history. Among the generic family photos were more pictures of Meghan and Noel, baking cookies, dressed up for Halloween, sitting together at a school play. The affection between them was palpable, real, and completely at odds with the polished, ambitious woman the world would come to know. This wasn't a casual friendship. This was a deep familial bond. But the biggest question remained. Who was Noel to Meghan? A secret daughter? A goddaughter she was unusually close to? The family, when Trevor finally managed to get a phone number, was polite, but firm. "We have no comment." Lena Giordano said, her voice tight with tension before hanging up. The silence was defensive practiced. It was the silence of a secret being protected. Trevor now knew one thing for certain. Meghan Markle had a life she never wanted anyone to find, and a little girl was at the very center of it. The mystery of Noel was consuming him, but Trevor knew that a few old photos weren't enough. He needed to understand the why. Why erase this? Why hide a seemingly loving relationship? The answer he would discover was far more calculated than he ever imagined. While cleaning out a storage locker, filled with boxes from his old production office, he found a cardboard box marked Early. Development. Inside were not scripts for movies, but for a life. It was a binder filled with Meghan's own handwritten notes and early typed drafts. But this wasn't a diary. It was a strategic plan, a blueprint. He flipped through the pages, his disbelief growing. There were lists. Target publications, Vogue, Vanity Fair, Elle. There were bullet points for future interviews. Emphasize humanitarian work. Talk about mixed heritage background as a strength. Distance from ditzy actress stereotype. It was all standard PR stuff, perhaps, but then he found the drafts. Full paragraphs written years in advance that would later appear almost verbatim in her actual interviews and profiles. She had written her own press years, before anyone was interested in printing it. One page was titled, Origin Story Refined. It was a point-by-point breakdown of her life from childhood to her future ambitions. And right in the middle he saw it. The missing year was accounted for with a single slick sentence. Took a transformative year for self-discovery and international charity work solidifying my global perspective. It was a placeholder. A lie waiting to be told. She had literally written the erasure of the Jordanos and Noel into her own mythos. But the most chilling find was on a single sheet of paper, a line written in all caps, circled twice as if it were a mission statement. From unnoticed to untouchable. It hit him like a physical blow. This wasn't just ambition. This was a prophecy. She was systematically constructing a new identity, one that was marketable, inspiring, and, most importantly, unassailable. The messy, complicated reality of a life in Chicago with a middle-class family and a child who looked like her. That didn't fit the narrative. That was a loose thread that could unravel the entire sweater. So she cut it. She pressed delete on an entire year on real human connections and replaced it with a glossy, sanitized fiction. The woman the world saw was a character, and Meghan was the writer, director, and star. Trevor was now holding the original script, and it proved that the final cut was a lie. Armed with the photos, the metadata, and the damning blueprint binder, Trevor felt a heavy responsibility. He wasn't sure what to do, but he knew he was sitting on a story that could change everything. And then a strange thing happened. It was as if the universe or someone with a vested interest sensed his discovery. The first sign was a phone call. A smooth professional voice from a reputable media outlet asked if he'd be willing to clarify a few timelines from his marriage for a routine profile piece. The questions were a little too specific, probing about Meghan's early years and personal relationships before fame. Trevor wary declined. The calls kept coming from different numbers, different publications, all with the same friendly, persistent tone. Then the offers started. An email from a talent lawyer, representing a major streaming platform, inquired about his archival materials, offering a staggering sum for a documentary perspective. Private investigator left a voicemail, claiming to be conducting background for a high-profile client and needing to verify the authenticity of certain photographs. The pressure was mounting, and it was coming from all sides. They weren't just asking. They were fishing. They were trying to find out what he had. The situation escalated from unsettling to terrifying one Tuesday evening. He came home to find his front door slightly ajar. Nothing was stolen. Nothing was out of place. It was a subtle professional job. But on his kitchen counter, placed squarely in the center, was a single unmarked envelope. His heart hammered against his ribs. Inside was a recent high-resolution photograph. It was of Noel, now several years older, walking home from school. On the back, typed in a stark, bold font, was a message. Let sleeping dogs lie. Some stories are safer untold. This wasn't a warning. This was a threat. A direct, unambiguous threat aimed at a child. They weren't just monitoring him. They were showing him they could reach into the lives of the very people he was trying to understand. He started noticing things. A dark sedan parked down the street for hours, the faint click on his phone line, the feeling of being watched that clung to him like a shadow. He bought a heavy-duty safe and moved the evidence to a secure location, his paranoia now a necessary survival instinct. He was no longer an investigator. He was a target. Trevor was trapped. He was in possession of a truth so volatile it had made him a target. Going public could put Noel and her family in unimaginable danger. Destroying the evidence would mean letting the lie win, allowing a manufactured identity to cement itself in history. There was no good option. He confided in one person, his oldest friend and former business partner, a man he trusted with his life. Over a late-night drink, he laid it all out. The photos, the blueprint, the threats. His friend listened, his face growing graver with each revelation. Trevor, he finally said, his voice low and serious. You're not holding a story. You're holding a live grenade. The pin's already been pulled. If you release this, it won't just be a scandal. It will be a war, and you will be the first casualty. But if you don't, This will hang over you forever. It was in that moment that Trevor devised his final desperate gambit. He would not be silenced, but he would not be a martyr. He would create a dead man's switch. He gathered every piece of evidence: the returned ring, the digital files, the printed photos, the chilling blueprint binder, even a copy of the threatening note. He meticulously cataloged everything, wrote a long, detailed statement explaining the context of each item, and sealed it all in a heavy, fireproof metal case. He then drove to the office of his attorney, a man known for his discretion and integrity. He handed him the case and a set of very specific, legally binding instructions. The documents were to be stored in a secure off-site vault. If Trevor Engleson were to die from anything other than verifiable natural causes, if he were to disappear, if he were even to retract his instructions under duress using a pre-arranged safety phrase, the entire contents of the case were to be immediately released to a pre-selected list of major international news outlets simultaneously. It was the ultimate insurance policy. He was locking the truth away, not to bury it, but to protect it. The secret was now a sentinel standing guard. By choosing this silent, powerful restraint, he had taken back control. The pressure campaign stopped. The mysterious calls ceased. The shadowy figures retreated back into the darkness. They knew. They understood the new rules of the game. The truth was in a vault, and Trevor held the only key not to open it, but to ensure it could never be permanently sealed. And so the story ends not with a bang, but with a whisper. A tense, fragile silence. Trevor Engleson retreated from public life, a ghost haunted by the specter of a truth he can never share. Meghan Markle ascended to a global platform, her image as a duchess and humanitarian seemingly untouchable. But for those who know how to listen, the silence is deafening. It echoes in the carefully curated interviews, the perfectly staged photos, the relentless control of a narrative that feels too clean, too seamless. The fairy tale is polished to a high shine, but if you look closely, you can see the cracks. You can see the ghost of a little girl in Chicago, the shadow of a missing year, and the reflection of a returned ring in a producer's palm. The evidence sits in that vault to this day, a monument to a story too dangerous to tell. It is a permanent question mark hanging over the House of Sussex. It proves that the most powerful stories are not the ones we are told, but the ones that are forced into silence. The most compelling mysteries are not those that are solved, but those that are carefully, deliberately, and permanently buried. So what is the truth? Was that missing year about a secret daughter she had to hide to protect her rising career? Was it a personal crisis she wanted to erase? Or was it something else, something even darker that required her to rebuild her entire identity from the ground up? The answer is locked away. Trevor chose not to decide, but the question remains hanging in the air, forever unanswered. What part of Meghan Markle's past was so dangerous that she had to invent a completely new one? The world may never know, but you can decide for yourself. What do you believe lies buried in those missing years? Share your theories in the comments below. The mystery is waiting.